Dr. Merlin, do you want to share your screen? And I'm going to introduce you, and then I will introduce the other speakers before they speak. And also, we're going to have Wendy Morse join Dr. Muoio as well. So Louis Merlin is an assistant professor in the Department of Urban Regional Planning at FAU. He draws upon a strong background in mathematics and operations research, as well as experience as a professional urban planner in his teaching and research. Dr. Merlin is particularly interested in developing mathematical models that shed insight into pressing urban problems. So Dr. Merlin, take it away. And if you're not speaking, just ask that you would mute yourself to avoid background noise. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John, for the introduction. I want to thank Hughes for hosting this event and for putting me on a panel with some distinguished panelists. Let's see. And I also want to thank my co-authors who are mentioned on this slide, including Ralph Buehler of Virginia Tech, who made this study possible. So I hope that if those of you who are planners kind of recognize this image over here on the right. It's an image of Clarence Perry's concept of a neighborhood unit, which dates back to the 1930s or the 1940s. The idea that we would design neighborhoods with the community institutions at the center and with all residential.
It's not like you're going to significantly regrade this.
With all residential units within a quarter mile, right? So this what this paper was. So I'm calling this circle the planner circle, because way before I was a PhD, before I came to Florida Atlantic University, when I was a practicing planner, we would draw these circles all the time. We would draw these circles for neighborhood planning, for activity center planning, for all kinds of purposes. So this paper was just published in the Journal of American Planning Association. So that's where we try to publish our work that's most oriented towards professional planners. I think this is the most practical work in terms of it can be put into use that I've ever published. I hope it is. I'd love to get feedback from professional planners on what they think, and also other research needs that you all think need to be addressed. I'm always looking for those. So I actually want to start with a survey on Slido. So you can open the survey with the QR code, or you can go to slido.com and enter this number 002164, and either one of those will let you take this survey. So the question of the survey is, when you draw the planner circle for neighborhood planning, what size circle do you usually draw? Because I've often heard both quarter mile and half mile, and I'm not sure, I don't know that I've heard guidance about when you use the quarter mile and when you use the half mile, or do you draw both, or do you not really use this concept? So love to hear what some of you all, currently do or have done. In every planning project I've ever done, we've drawn something like this, a half mile or a quarter mile circle. So I'll give it maybe 1 minute. Seems like both is going to be the most common answer so far, although I see some none. It's interesting because I usually see one or the other, but I'm glad to hear that people are looking at both. So here's what interested me. I was trying to figure out why a quarter mile, why a half mile. There's some common sense to this, right? We know how far people walk, but I never saw a study. I never saw research into why these distances. So because I didn't see that study, I decided to do that study. So that's exactly what this paper is about. And I think I'll keep the poll open because people can keep giving their answers, but it looks like most people draw both, which is good. I think it's great that people draw both. So the question we ask is really simple. How far will people walk? So we look at actual walk distances from 2 national household travel surveys, the United States and Germany. So this is great because the United States and Germany do very similar travel surveys, and they both did in the same year in 2017, which is pretty recent. And so we were able to make all of these interesting comparisons about how people walk in the United States versus how people walk in Germany. We've got 75,000 walk trips in our data set in the United States and 160,000 walk trips in Germany. So we have the very rich, deep data set to do all kinds of interesting data analysis. And so the way we organize this is we basically created 3 thresholds for how far people will walk. So we said the 50th percentile, the median, if at least half people walk this distance, we consider this to be a pretty walkable distance. But we want to accommodate longer walks too. So we also looked at the 75th percentile, which means at least 25% walk this distance or more, and the 90th percentile, which means at least 10% of people walk this distance or more. So we're looking at 3 different thresholds. The shortest one is quite comfortable. The 75th is maybe a bit of an effort or a bit of a stretch, and the 90th is a little bit unusual, but we think we should accommodate these longer walks whenever possible, right? We shouldn't be discouraging long walks. We should be encouraging them. So what are the factors that affect walk distance? We did a literature review. Probably none of these results will surprise anyone. The built environment is very important, and there's so many different built environment factors, not just 1 or 2, but things like street density, shade, quality of sidewalks, aesthetics, the beauty of the built environment is important. Weather is very important, and weather is very understudied. Let me say that too. We don't have a lot of good data on the weather. Demographics, attitudes, are people environmentally oriented? Do they care about their health? And trip purpose is also very important. Now, I'm sorry to say that everything that's in dark gray, we weren't actually able to study because they didn't ask those questions in the National Household Travel Survey. We're really taking a deep dive just on 2 factors, which is demographics and trip purpose. And we're kind of going to talk about the built environment, although it was the only way it was directly measured was density. That's the only direct measure of the built environment. So this summarizes the empirical results from both studies from both the United States and Germany. So I'm going to start talking about the factors that have a large effect. Age. The age of the pedestrian had a pretty large effect. The day of the week also had a pretty large effect, with people walking longer on weekends. Trip purpose, that was probably the most important factor on how far people were willing to walk. And not always, but almost always, Germans, for every trip purpose, Germans walk further than Americans. So just start thinking about why. We'll talk about that some more later, and that'd be a good topic for questions. Then I also want to talk just as much about the factors that have little effect on walk distance. So income and education. So a lot of people, some people assume lower income people walk more, or higher educated people walk more. We did not see any significant effect of any of those variables.
Hey,
very much.
How are you?
Oh, fuck. What's up, bro?
We've got household size, vehicle ownership. So this was probably the most surprising. It's true that people who own fewer vehicles walk more, but it's not necessarily true that they walk further per trip on a per trip basis. We're looking at individual trips. So we didn't find an effect of vehicle ownership. So this summarizes what we found in terms of walk trip distance by purpose. Leisure trips are far and away the longest trips. And that can include trips for social purposes, trips for dining out, work and school related trips are longer. And the shortest trips are trips for shopping and errands. Shopping makes sense because you often have to carry something with you. So shopping trips tend to be the shortest. Errand trips tend to be, I guess, time constrained and short. So there's a strong influence on trip purpose. Okay, this is really, really interesting, and I can't fully explain it, but we looked at this is the average walk distance by age. And what you see is that the youngest people under 18, walk the furthest in the United States, but that's not the case in Germany. They're walking the least distance in Germany. The people who are walking the most distance are the middle-aged and the seniors in Germany. So, I think this is a very complex result that's hard to unpack, but one of my interpretations is that I don't think it's really that much about health. I think it's much more about cultural factors, expectations, norms, than it is about physical health. Why people are walking.
Watching the Merlin chair.
think we got another. Why people are walking as they grow older, why people are walking less distances in the United States, but are walking more distances in Germany. So part of the reason I think people are walking more distances in the United States, well, there's two obvious reasons. One is more time, but the other is most of these people can't drive, right? So they rely on walking much more for their mobility. Okay, so this research was meant to be used. It was meant to be practical. So this is just very simple instructions for using this research. So we know that age and trip purpose are important. So when you're planning a neighborhood or a community center or an activity center, think about these questions and use this tool. And I'm gonna jump to the website that has all the results in a second. What is the age that you're planning for? What are the target age ranges? And you could plan for multiple, but it's helpful if you can identify a key target age range. What are the trip purposes that are most of interest? Then you go to the tables and you look up the 50th, the 75th, and the 95th percentiles, presumably for the US table, unless you happen to be in Europe. You can also cross-reference with the German table if you want to think about even longer walk distances, which are shown in the German table. And then you just draw those circles on your map. You draw the appropriate circles you need to plan for these distances. So I'm going to do two very brief examples just to make sure that this is quite clear. Oh yes, I think to share my website, I need to stop and start again. So just give me a second to stop and start. So this is on my personal web page. I have all of the results on my personal web page through Florida Atlantic University. So this shows for each trip purpose, for each country, for each age, the 50th percentile, the 75th percentile, and the 90th percentile in meters. So it's just a bunch of numbers that shows all of the data in meters. But the point is to use this, right? The point is to use this in an applied setting. So let's imagine that we're planning a new urbanist neighborhood that has a shopping district at its core. How close does the housing need to be for people to actually walk to the shopping district, right? This is all about distances and walkability of those distances. So we pull up the data for shopping trip purpose. I'm assuming that it's young adults who are buying homes or renting homes in this area. And we get three thresholds. We get basically 400 meters, 700 meters, and 1,000 meters. So the shortest threshold is 400, then the median is 700, then the third is 1,000. So my interpretation of this is that if we want to create the most walkable zone, that would be about 400 meters, which is the quarter mile, which is what we normally do. If we want to look at the moderate walkability zone, we'll go out to 700 meters, which is 0.45 miles, almost half a mile. But I think this is where we're probably under planning for walkability. It's really walkable up to 1,000 meters, even for shopping, which is 0.62 miles. So I think we should. The way I would do this is I would draw at least two. At least I draw the inner and the outer, maybe all three. I would draw three circles: 400, 700, and 1,000 meters, and plan for how. So I probably would plan for the most dense housing types within that 400 meter zone. But within that 700 and 1,000 meter zone, I would also plan for a significant amount of housing. And I would also think about the routes. How would the routes connect as directly and as comfortably as possible to this central shopping district? I want to give one more example just to show that the numbers do vary quite a bit. So this second case study is the idea of a neighborhood park. We're going to plan a new neighborhood park, and we want to make sure that kids can walk to it. So we're going to focus on a different demographic than the previous study. Okay, so go to the table, look at the 0 to 17 age group, look at leisure trips, excluding loop trips. So leisure trips, a lot of leisure trips are people walking from home and going back to home. Those are the loop trips. So we excluded those trips, so it's just one-way trips. And you can see that the walk distances are quite a bit further for leisure trips, right? Up to 1,000 almost for the 50th and 1,700 for the 75th and 2,000 for the 90th. So if we translate this into miles, for walking to parks, for young people, we would have 0.6 miles for the most walkable zone, 1.1 miles for moderate walkability, and 1.3 miles for feasible walkability. So, if we're drawing quarter mile and half mile circles, I think we're vastly underestimating walkability for certain trip purposes and for certain demographic segments. And so this is what the 3 planning circles would look like for your park district. You're proposing a park and you want to look at that 950 meter buffer and the 1800 and the 2100 meter buffer. Okay, so yes, we all know, we've known for a long time that distance matters very much in walking, more than any other mode. Walking is sensitive to distance. However, it's not just a quarter mile for everything, and that's quarter mile is the one I see the most. Now, that doesn't mean putting things within a quarter mile isn't a good idea. I just think it's too narrow. It very much depends on the age of the pedestrian that we're planning for, and it also very much depends on the trip purpose. And then lastly, it really depends on the qualities of the built environment. Now, we weren't able to study the built environment directly here, but certainly one of the reasons that we find much longer walking distances in Germany than the United States is better built environment, which is covered by innumerable factors such as safer street crossings, slower speeds, better infrastructure, less wait times at traffic lights, automated signal crossings for pedestrians. But I also think there's cultural factors as well. I think there's a culturally, Germans are more likely to accept longer walk distances. So the big bottom line conclusion of the paper is don't just draw a quarter mile circle for everything. Use the data that we have, draw the right circle for the right purpose. Okay, I'm going to yield the rest of the time to the other 2 speakers because I'm sure they have very interesting things to say. This is just my contact information if you want to follow up with me afterwards.
Dr. Merlin, thank you. There's a couple of really quick technical questions that I'll just ask. A couple in the chat, and then I guess I have one as well. But the first one is, do you have disaggregated data for the 18 to 29? Because basically 18 to 22, college students may have different patterns compared to, those who are maybe 22 to 29.
I do have that data. I have not done the analysis with that data, but the age is shown to the year. So we created those age groups, but you could disaggregate college age students and do a separate analysis for that age. Yes.
Great. And then another question was, what time of day was considered in the analysis? Many school work, shopping, and leisure trips are during the dark for large parts of each year.
Yeah, we also looked at time of day. One of the problems is that we're looking at the whole United States, and there's very different daylight hours in northern parts of the United States and the southern parts of the United States. We didn't see huge effects for time of day. We in general in the United States, people will do a little bit longer walk distance in the morning. I actually thought it might have to do with weather, that people prefer walking in the cool weather. But we didn't see huge effects by time of day, modest effects by time of day. But that data is also available and could be the subject of an additional study.
And then I had my own question in wondering, did you look at network distance? Because I imagine the distances reported in NHTS were network distances, and you kind of were showing more kind of crowfly distances.
Yes, so it's interesting because the distances are actually different between the United States and Germany. In the United States, the distances are network distances, calculated network distances, which the crowfly may exaggerate it a bit, depending on the quality of your pedestrian network. If you have a very dense pedestrian network, the crowfly is a good estimate, but it may overestimate. It actually may overestimate. It is network distances. In Germany, it was self-reported distances, which also means the data aren't directly comparable, but I still think it's quite believable that people are walking longer distances in Germany.
Well, great. I'm sure maybe there'll be more questions towards the end when we have kind of the panel Q&A. So thank you so much, Louis. We're gonna shift gears now, and we're going to hear from, and Lisa, I apologize if I mispronounced your last name the first time. I don't know if I did or not, but is it pronounced Nisenson?
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, so Lisa is the Vice President of New Mobility and Connected Communities for WGI. WGI is based here in Palm Beach County. She leads development of next generation planning, smart city technology strategies, emerging mobility, and integrated placemaking. Her specialty is developing next generation planning techniques to incorporate trends and technologies into projects. Her clients include municipalities, private real estate developers, regional agencies, and campus managers. Currently, her work includes a curbside management and parking study, several vision and mobility plans, phase 1 of automated shuttle transit services, and research on autonomous shuttles. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you. And thank you for sharing your lunch with us and today is actually National Sandwich Day. So good time to have a lunch and learn. I have my colleague's name here, Angela Biaggi. She can also answer some questions next. So what I want to talk about is this notion of programmable streets, which is kind of a new concept, because when we think about streets, we think about pouring a bunch of concrete and curbs, and it pretty much stays that way for the life of the street. But right now we are going through really a renaissance in how we think about streets, and that's because streets don't do the same thing every day, and we're beginning to wake up to that new flow of the curb, but also this new notion of streets as real estate. And that was even predated COVID, but now after COVID, we're really looking at how people use the street in new ways that unlocked new value. We've also got e-commerce competing for curbsides. We have new modes of transportation. And of course, that underlying notion that no matter what you do, it's really the good placemaking and walkability that dictates how your built environment is going to work. Next. The other reason we're really looking hard at programmable streets is because there is this new era of innovation when it comes to vehicle types. And even though I do a lot of work with cars, what we're starting to find is really that innovation in everything that's between 5 and 20 miles per hour. Of course, we know the scooters, but things like e-skateboards, Rad Bicycles just introduced an e-bike that goes up to 37 miles an hour. We've got these autonomous delivery bots that can go anywhere from 25 to 35 miles an hour, mopeds. And the reason we're having to talk about this is because of the question of, well, what's going to go where? Is it going to go on the sidewalk, in a bike lane, in a travel lane? Do we need new kinds of lanes? But I really do think for the sake of pedestrians, we need to start ironing some of this stuff out. And of course, for bicyclists, we're going to have to figure out how to remove some of that friction of all these different bikes going different miles per hour. Next. So we think that there's a new approach to start thinking about streets. And some of that is we're also in a golden age of experimentation and pilots. There's also all these new technologies and the interplay amongst them. Cities don't adapt one technology at a time, nor do consumers, and there's feedback loops amongst those. So what we want to do is help our clients learn how these feedback loops work and plan accordingly. We also know that infrastructure design matters for things like walkability and safe walkability. So we're going to need to reduce complexity, and that's true for humans and for robots. We need to design for flexibility and phasing, and we need to design for competition for space. That's just the world we're in right now. And again, just to put a very strong point, it really everything starts with good placemaking. Next. So why are we talking about programmable streets? Well, we have actually in the past programmed streets, and if you see on the left, this is how we've done it. You tend to put up a bunch of different signs that tell a driver when and where they can park, for how long, what kind of vehicle. And the more that you want to add flexibility to your street, the more signs you add. And of course, that is turning out to be a little bit of a tough thing to do. So what we're paying attention to is this new notion of programming streets, physically, digitally, and financially, and leveraging technology to get there. Next. So I'm going to go through a bunch of slides that just kind of slice and dice the topic a little bit into bite-sized pieces. The first one we're looking at really hard is modular infrastructure. There are lots of companies out there that are beginning to create new types of separators, delineators, outdoor furniture, even charging and recharging, parking. And in this slide, you've got the modular planter. And as you can see at the bottom, it's got the slats, and that's so it can be moved around by a forklift. You can have a bike lane, but it doesn't have to be there 24 hours a day forever. And that kind of helps reduce the temperature of a heated debate about whether or not there should be complete streets, because this way it lets you try it before you buy it, or it doesn't have to be all the time. You can have your complete streets and your regular streets too. And then some of these other methods with the temporary bike line delineators. If you've ever been to downtown West Palm Beach, you see our famous retractable bollards, and that gives the city a way to program the streets based on what they want that parking space to be. And it could be dining, it could be walking, it could be events, it can be a flea market. But really this idea that you can begin to program what you need when you need it. And then of course we do have to have a very strong conversation on charging and recharging and what that infrastructure looks like in the built right of way, and especially on sidewalks for pedestrians. Next slide, please. We should also look at alleys. There are a lot of those here in South Florida, and we're beginning to see a lot of activation of alleys around the country, especially in areas where the real estate is really expensive or where you have a really popular downtown. A third reason, though, is with this autonomous shuttle here, we can expect a lot more deliveries by some of these robots. I doubt they'll be allowed everywhere, but alleys could go back to their original purpose of being that back door, that service alley where packages come and go, but then also being able to unlock that real estate when the deliveries aren't occurring to be places for people. Next. This is one of my favorite topics, and that is the new ways of designing shared paths, especially now that we've got all these new vehicle types coming on board. So you can see in the top left hand, one of the most famous complete streets upgrades that's ever been done from Lancaster, California, where it took a road that looks like a lot of roads, or as Chuck Maroon calls them, stroads around Florida, and really turned it into a place where you could have a park space, you could have parking, you could have festival streets and things of this nature. Again, it's all in the design. On the lower left-hand side, you can see a trail that's been built in England that is both a active transportation path for pedestrians and bicyclists, but also a travel way for some of the autonomous transit that's starting to come along. I'm not so enthused about autonomous cars, the separate cars, but I am really interested in remaking transit, especially that missing middle of transit for vehicles that carry anywhere from 4 to 6 to up to 12 to 15 people. And if we can make that pencil out, because you don't have the need for a driver, then that's a great idea. Time will tell if we can get to that sort of dream. But I think that by designing the infrastructure right, we can actually make that occur faster. Also is a shared use path where you can see bicyclists, dune buggies, pedestrians, autonomous shuttles. This is in California. It was designed by Alta. So you can see the hunger for this type of new shared use path is coming to fruition. And then in the upper right-hand side, this is a path we designed along Okeechobee. And I do think that there is beginning to be some serious thought about the sharrows on arterial roads that are marked 45 miles an hour. And how can we actually get that bike lane up and out of the travelway in better design? And I think that this actually might be one of the tools in the toolbox. Next. Also, when you're talking about programming, you can talk about phasing. Again, that idea that you can test ideas and tweak them and improve upon them before you get to that greater investment of a complete street. And that could be anything from demonstration with some of these wave delineators that, again, going back to that modular furniture. It could be quick build, again, which is another reference to modular infrastructure. And quick build is becoming part of our lexicon. So get used to it and look for it in grant applications and things like that. It's intended to last 1 to 5 years. And really has made a difference in making sure that we can get to complete streets faster and for lower cost. And then, of course, the permanent installation. So again, that idea that you don't have to do everything at once, but you can phase it. Next. Now, I want to talk a little bit about parking technology, and I struggled with this. It's like, this is about complete streets and pedestrians. Why should we talk about parking? Well, the simple reason is that a lot of times 30% of local traffic and congestion is people looking for a parking space. And as you would know, if you've searched for a parking space, if you don't know exactly where you're going, your attention is not always on the other cars and other pedestrians and bicyclists. So all of this technology that can really make it easy to go directly to a parking space all of a sudden can help reduce that traffic. And so that's why I'm a big fan of this as something that's part of downtown mobility. So you can free up some of that space and make it less congested and more visible. The second technology that could make a huge difference is self-parking cars. I think there was a ad during a Super Bowl one time on Pack the Car. But really what it allows is for cars to be parked closer together. You get out of the car, it slips into its space. You don't need that room for the doors to go in and out. So why does that matter? Well, why it matters is because it can reduce 43% of the space that's needed just to park cars, taking into account that extra space. So again, freeing up that space that can be used for better uses could be something that's a key to redevelopment and a technology that really can help us again unlock value from our built environment and redevelopment. Next. So what does it mean and how do you put this into place? And an example of curbside management is first and foremost, mapping and digitizing your streets. There is now a movement to come up with a singular data standard called CurbLR. And really that's just a common language for how we map out all of the different signage, all of the different street trees, all of the different types of parking spaces. So that entrepreneurs can come in and look at your data set and come up with that next new code that's going to actually help you manage your streets better. There are companies now like Cord and Curbflow that are beginning to build sensors and cameras into the built landscape. And then by applying artificial intelligence, it can actually help your city understand better the rhythm and the flow of the street and better manage it. And then here on the far right, this is an image from the American Society for Civil Engineers. You can imagine that you have dynamic signage. I think the term of art is variable messaging signage, pardon me, that during the time of day, once you know the rhythm of your street, you can begin to allocate and reallocate different parts of the block to the different uses that are in highest demand. It also lets you do dynamic pricing so that you can send those signals and actually let a driver make a decision on exactly where they want to park. They can park closer in, but it may be more expensive. And then technology will let them know where another parking space may be further out. And again, I know this is a presentation about pedestrians, but I think we need to acknowledge that drivers are part of the landscape. And the things we can do to actually help people park on the periphery and not be stuck in traffic, and then to walk because we've created great spaces is all part of the recipe to really driving towards that landscape that we really want, that mobility system that we want. Next. We can't forget that a lot of what's going to enable the digitization and the really technology driven part of our street is that digital infrastructure. Right now, we know those as things like cell phone antennas and underground cables, but there's this whole new realm of different technologies that are going to be needed to support autonomous vehicles, real-time information, or whether you want to walk down the street streaming Netflix. Maybe there's some Squid Game and Pokemon Go going on there, but all of that requires some heavy-duty communications. For planners, this is a big deal because at the federal level, the telecommunications companies are exempt from local rules. There's been some delegation problems there. We as planners have been trying to work with other entrepreneurs so that we can fit all this stuff into the built landscape in ways that don't interfere with the aesthetics and with the walkability, but still deliver on that promise of the things we want that have become part of our everyday life. Next. And then in wrapping up, we also, for Complete Streets, can begin to reimagine those streets where they're not doing the same thing. The lanes are not doing the same thing every day. This mast arm on the left is from Cincinnati, Ohio, and it's one of my favorites because basically you can take the standard sign, take it off the pole, put it on the masthead, and you can watch it change throughout the day as a traffic engineer begins to reassign the lanes based on transit prioritization, for example. You can reset speed limits if you want to. No turn on red if you've got a bunch of pedestrians in the evening. And just the idea that we can begin to have these kinds of multi-use streets throughout the day. And then finally, when we're looking at matching the infrastructure with transit and microtransit, we need to ask ourselves a lot of different questions about the value of where those vehicles are allowed to go and how can we make the autonomous systems work so that that shuttle ride is as convenient or even more convenient than somebody who's getting into their car. Next slide. The most underrated technology is that which is in your pocket, your smartphone. And I think we're going to see over the next couple of years a lot of tools that are going to help transit riders and pedestrians as we try and navigate the landscape. This example is my favorite because my least favorite thing to do at a multimodal hub is try and figure out which bus I need to take. Move It has created augmented reality. So you just hold up your phone and scan the landscape and it tells you which bus, it tells you how many stops, and takes all that guesswork that makes transit so hard, especially if you're in a new town or you're taking a new route. So I just want to give a heads up on that and really challenge us to begin to factor this into how we plan for cities when there's pushback because, oh, we don't walk here, or, you know, it's only the young people who are pedestrians, which Professor Merlin proved wrong. We can begin to actually proactively plan for that future where the navigation by foot and by transit is so much easier. Next slide. And pulling it all together, you know, just making sure that the infrastructure, the architecture, the public works, the street design, and everything is working well in tandem. I could do an entire lunch and learn on this image, but I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Muoio. So thank you for your attention to this, your interest. I hope there was some knowledge and some delight in all of the stuff that we put together. So I appreciate it. And the question is Move It international? And indeed they are. And while we're on the Germany theme, I think they are located out of Germany. And they hope to become international because I think their tools are really fantastic.
Lisa, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. I do want to kind of put in a small plug for a study that Dr. Merlin and I are working on with Serena.
You know, sometimes when
that is kind of a similar to Move It. We are in the process of building an app called URide that is going to be oriented very similar to Move It, but oriented to university students here in South Florida, particularly at FAU, Broward College, and Palm Beach State College, with the hopes that it will kind of become like the university version of a Move It app that could scale nationally. And that's funded through the Kresge Foundation. We'll make that a subject of a future webinar. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. I am very excited to present the keynote speaker of this forum. Dr. Jeri Muoio is the former mayor of West Palm Beach. She was first elected mayor in 2011, and she was reelected in 2015. And that was after she previously had served for 4 years on the city commission prior to 2011. During her administration, she presided over economic resurgence of the city of West Palm Beach. Her strength focuses on, her focus was on strengthening the economy. It led to hundreds of new jobs in West Palm Beach. Under her leadership, business tax receipts grew by 61%, property values increased by 45%, job growth rose by 20%, and more, which is more than double the national average. She created the Flagler Financial District, which is now home to more than 300 financial services companies. As the mayor, she focused on making West Palm Beach a great place for employers to work, believing that employees who are proud of where they work will better serve the community. Through a partnership with the Great Place to Work organization, Dr. Muoio worked to build a work culture based on trust. She's currently the president and CEO of Great Cities for All, a business focused on building great work cultures, developing leaders within organizations, and government and community engagement. Her PhD is from Syracuse University. And I just wanted to kind of just wrap up by saying that, you know, before this, we spoke and I said, you know, and she said, you know, John, what do you want me to share with the group? And I said, listen, you know, most of the people joining this call are professional planning practitioners. But, you know, we're trying to figure out how we can serve elected officials, both by educating them and giving them the tools they need to do the great things that West Palm Beach has done under her leadership. And so, you know, I think, you know, she suffered the good, the bad, and the ugly when she was mayor. And as a resident of West Palm Beach, I was very proud to have a mayor so committed to these issues. So Jeri, welcome, and look forward to hearing your presentation.
Well, thank you, John. I'm really happy to be here with you. And I'm glad that you clarified that I am not a professional in this field. I am a practitioner and relied so much on folks like John and Lisa to help me understand where we needed to be going. So I'm excited to be here. I have with me Wendy Morse. Wendy and I worked together while I was mayor, and we'll get a little deeper into what her role was as we get through the slides. So I'm going to screen share, and hopefully this will all work. All right, everybody see it? Okay, as John said, that I've started a business after I was term limited as mayor. I completed my time as mayor in 2019 and started Great Cities for All. So here's a picture of me being sworn in as mayor. Those are my two grandchildren who are now like getting ready to go to college. And I was standing there saying the words that would make me mayor, thinking, what the heck did I get myself into? I had no idea really what my job was going to be. And in West Palm Beach, we have what's called a strong mayor form of government, which meant that I was in charge of all of the operations of the city. We didn't have a city manager, we had a city administrator. That person reported directly to me. So I was the head of the organization with 1,600 employees, $500 million budget. And I thought, you know, what really is my job? And when I took over, we were facing a lot of challenges just coming out of the recession of 2007. Our unemployment rate was at 9.9%. Our property values had dropped by 30%. Our workforce was depleted and discouraged. We had lost over 300 employees, and the people who were still working there hadn't had a raise in 5 years and weren't really too happy. We also were having problems with our water system and some of the environmental issues that were challenging. And residents really were not all that happy with the services that they received from City Hall. And we were particularly had limited new construction because some of the unhappiness rested with the challenges it took to get a permit to build in West Palm. We really needed to address that. So as a result of this, I realized that one of my most important jobs as the leader of the city was to lay out a vision. And that vision included bringing more jobs to our city, lowering that unemployment rate, bringing people back to our city, making it easy to build in our city, addressing the organizational structure of West Palm Beach so that we had a development services department that was responsive to development that wanted to come in the city, and addressing environmental issues. So it was jobs, the environment, reorganizing city government so that it was more responsive to the public. So shortly after I was mayor, one of the local architects brought me this book, Walkable Cities by Jeff Speck. And that really started me off on thinking about where we ought to be as a city and what we needed to do to attract people to our city. You know, when I first became mayor, I thought, oh, I'm going to be traveling all over the world, and I'm going to be talking to people and trying to convince them to bring their company to our city. And, you know, they're going to just want to come. Well, no, we had to have something that they'd want to come to. So we needed to build our city into a place where people wanted to be. We wanted to be more walkable. We wanted to be more bikeable. We wanted to be more business friendly. I had moved to West Palm Beach in 2002 after having lived in both New York City and Boston. And I knew the vitality of walkable cities. I experienced it though. So when I read this book, I thought, you know, this is really where we need to be going. And I actually was able to bring Jeff Speck in to do a study of our city. And these were some of the recommendations he came up with. Clematis Street and City Place have yet to coalesce in a single self-supporting mixed corridor. For those of you who know West Palm Beach, our City Place, Clematis Street are both sort of retail urban centers that existed within a couple of blocks of each other, but were not connected. Certain streets, particularly the state-owned Okeechobee and Quadrille, were downright hazardous to pedestrians. This is where some of our challenges came in, trying to convince people like the Florida Department of Transportation and the County Department of Transportation that people needed to be able to cross Okeechobee Boulevard. It wasn't just for cars. We had a new hotel there. We had a link to a retail area. They needed to be able to get across the street. We also wanted to, he mentioned Flagler Drive. Flagler Drive, for those of you who don't know West Palm Beach, is an area, is a road, street right along our waterfront. And it cuts off downtown and the waterfront with a 4-lane street. We've had several studies done since the Jeff Speck recommendations that said we need to bring the water to the people and address the issue of Flagler Drive. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we had no plans for bike lanes or bicycling in the city. So we really started working on his recommendations, developing a bicycle master plan, really looking at how we can best connect Clematis Street, City Place, and other areas of our city, where we needed to work with the state and the county on addressing crossing lights and how to make them more pedestrian friendly. I also had the opportunity to go to Copenhagen in 2015. This was sponsored by the Knight Foundation, and I am there in the upper right-hand corner. and on the bicycle. And we really learned a lot from the folks at GAL Studios and 880 Cities. If you're not familiar with 880 Cities, 880 Cities works with cities to make them places good for 8-year-olds as well as 80-year-olds. GAL Studios was founded by Jan Gehl, one of the first architects to start talking about building cities for people and designing cities for people. And I have to say, just being in Copenhagen was just a great learning experience for me, and came back with so many ideas that I think I sort of overwhelmed my staff with all of the things that I wanted to do. So we invited GAL Studios in to take a look at our city, and they did. And I like this quote: "To create a healthy and livable city with a vibrant public life, you need to invest in the public realm." So we wanted to make our city a place where people wanted to be. And some of you might be familiar with the Gallup study that was done many years ago that talked about why people loved their city. And there were 3 things that came up. 1, is it aesthetically beautiful? 2, is it accepting and open to diverse population? And 3, are there places where people can come together and enjoy community? And that places where people come together, that public realm, is just so critical to making your city a vibrant and exciting place. So the key takeaways from the folks at GAL, and Wendy, I'm going to invite you to chime in here wherever you would like. But one of the things that they said was quality invites quantity. We needed high quality spaces to bring people to. We have a beautiful waterfront. And when GAL did their research, and they did extensive research when they were writing the report, they did focus groups, they had online surveys. They asked people, what are your favorite places in the city? And so many people said the waterfront. But what we found out was that they had reasons to go to the waterfront, but no reason to stay unless there was an event. So there was no chairs, there were no places for people to sit and gather. We needed more shade and seating and lighting. It was a great place when we had Clematis by night, or we had other events there, people wanted to be there, but on an everyday basis, while it was beautiful, why would they go there? We also really needed to start thinking about moving away from cars, although our cars still dominated. And I think one of the critical parts was we're a very compact city. You can get places easily, but the journey was long. The facades were boring. We have 2 railroad lines through the middle of our city. To get from one end to Clematis Street to the other was not the most inviting walk. So how could we address these issues? Wendy, do you want to add anything to what I said about these key takeaways?
Not yet. I think you're doing great. And I think it's important, like John said, to have a leader like you who can drive some of this, because otherwise nobody has the bandwidth for it, So keep going. You're doing great.
Okay, so again, these were some more of the recommendations, but we needed to prioritize safe, comfortable connections. So we needed to make it easy for people to get from City Place to Clematis Street. One of my favorite stories is I had a woman who was like, I am never walking. It's too hot. It's too uncomfortable. She lived in the 600 block of Clematis Street and worked in the 200 block of Clematis Street. So basically there was a 4-block walk for her. She drove her car every day to work. And like, how do I get you out of your car so you can walk to work? And we needed to plan for a human scale city and what that looks like. We had some empty spaces in our downtown, which are now filling in. We had some boring facades, which are now much more interesting because our very extensive art in public places. There's murals all over downtown. We bring the water to the people has been something that we have been wanting to do since 1994. And Ledney and I and a couple of other people took on a pilot project to eliminate 2 of the lanes on Flagler Drive and make those pedestrian focused and eventually part of our waterfront park, and use the other 2 lanes for north-south traffic. We did this, we closed off 2 lanes, we moved the 2 north-south traffic in the other 2 lanes. We had studied the number of cars on Flagler Drive. We knew if we could do that, it wouldn't be a traffic problem, but we had a huge uprising of people who were not happy. And they did not like this idea. It was a pilot project. We wanted to start it. We had some people who were moving into one of the more expensive high rises in our city who put a lot of money behind fighting our plan. And we stepped away from it because we couldn't fight it, actually. And this has been going on since 1994. And I hope someday we're going to be able to do it. But there's always those not in my backyard people, right? And I love this one. All neighborhoods should have a favorite place. I think as we're transitioning to sort of different work styles, the central business district is going to become less and less important as more people work from home for part of their work week, which means that the neighborhood business areas are going to need to be important, and we need to focus on those. And building those favorite places in our neighborhood is going to be critical. So Gal recommended several ideas to us. One of them was to complete Clematis Street. And the second was to do something called Dance into the Sunset. We have moved forward and completed Clematis Street. We redid 5 blocks of our main street in our city, making it available for multiple uses. Lisa talked a little bit about this with movable bollards. It's a space that's shared by pedestrians and cars. And it worked out so amazingly with COVID because of great space for outdoor dining. So the restaurants along Clematis Street could easily convert to outdoor dining. We could have our flea market on Saturday there, connected to our green market on the park. And we can connect to City Place, now known as Rosemary Square. We also worked on Dancing to the Sunset. And what that meant is in West Palm Beach, there's a street called Rosemary Street. On one end of Rosemary is City Place and a brand new Hilton, our hotel. On the other end of Rosemary is our historic African-American Northwest neighborhood. That neighborhood, 10 minutes walk from downtown, and people rarely went. We bought the Sunset Lounge, we the city bought the Sunset Lounge. Sunset Lounge was part of the Chitlin Circuit back in the 40s, where Black bands could play. One of the few places in the South African-American bands could perform. If you ever watched that movie, The Green Book, that's what the Sunset Lounge was about. So we purchased it and we're in the process of renovating it. And then we started to talk about how do we connect? How do we get people from the Hilton Hotel, from City Place, to walk 3 blocks down Rosemary, 4 blocks, to attend a jazz concert at Sunset Lounge? So Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you. You're unmute.
Sorry.
I'm sorry,
Someone
Wendy.
just asked, most cities don't have someone who is in charge of making great public spaces for people. So I was sharing that was my role under you. And part of that was we strategically created spaces along the way, like breadcrumbs, so that people would come up and start to be comfortable with walking and transitioning from our downtown north towards the sunset.
So talk a little bit about some of the events that are occurring now.
So we started doing something called Fourth Friday on 4th Street, which was an outdoor event. We created a kind of like the picture down here on the lower left, where they could walk. We'd close down the street. They'd come up, spend some time. It was free. There was the opportunity for food. So a lot of people in the Northwest neighborhood were cooking in their homes, and they would have these like catering type of businesses. And we were able to give them a little incubator space so that they could start earning money in our public spaces, and people got to know them and started to build some bandwidth, because one of the projects that was going along with the sunset was a place called Sticks Alley, where they were going to be spaces for small businesses, family run. And that way we could actually give the opportunity to local residents who had been living in the neighborhood, which happened to be one of those lower socioeconomic neighborhoods that had been impacted literally by the highway back then would have been Palm Beach Lakes Boulevard that cut the Northwest neighborhood in half. But all the things that you're seeing in the news right now, we had already gotten on board to start transitioning, to start helping those communities. And now those events are all occurring right in front of the sunset. So people, they're well attended. They can have 300 to 500 people at them, started being able to do that. And we installed those pedestrian sensors at the corner of Banyan and Rosemary. So we could tell how much foot traffic was actually coming from the downtown on the nights when we would have these events. And it really increased exponentially. So we could see that what we were starting to do was having an impact.
Yeah, so if you look at the upper map, on the far left side is the Sunset Lounge. And right in front of the Sunset Lounge is now the Sunset Park, which is really quite beautiful and has sort of a music theme to it. And then again, just south of it is Sticks Alley, where we'll be having incubators for local businesses. And at the far right side and south is Clematis Street, and south of that is City Place. So again, our goal was in this particular, and we have several other examples, but in this particular example was to connect folks from the south to the north and make it a pleasant place for people to be and to walk and to want to be able to get to where they wanted to go. So I think one of the other things I wanted to talk about was the effect on private industry. We brought Gell Studios in. We redesigned Clematis Street, which looks a little like the upper left-hand picture. And then the folks at City Place, now Rosemary Square, a privately owned entity, said, we want to do the same thing. So they brought Gell Studios in, and they totally redesigned their property. It was called City Place, and they didn't want it to be a place in the city. They didn't want it to be a city place, a separate place. They wanted it to be a place in the city. They wanted to connect it to the rest of the city, not have it be a separate entity. And so this was originally developed in like the late 90s, early 2000s, when it was sort of a separate, closed in, everything was facing inward project. When we started doing the work in the city and bringing in experts like Spec and Gell Studios, this private organization started thinking, no, we don't want to be inward facing. We want to be outward facing. We want to invite people to connect from Clematis Street to Rosemary Square. So, I mean, that was one of the unexpected positive things that happened as a result of the work that we were doing. The other thing we started was the Office of Public Life. We were the first city in the country to have an Office of Public Life, and Wendy was in charge of that Office of Public Life. And Wendy, talk a little bit about what your job was and what your focus was.
So as you can see by the video, it was really to be a communications hub directly to the mayor, and to eliminate some of the political walls that you could run into in order to make sure that we were meeting the goals that we were trying to get to. Because just as she was discussing the bollards on Clematis, that was a huge fight because the cost went up exponentially. But it wasn't just important now when you think about shutting the street down, but we were having, I come from a policing background, and we were having issues with different vehicles mowing down people. So if we were going to create a city that felt safe, things like bollards for particular types of events were really important. But you had to have somebody who had the backing of the mayor and the bandwidth to be able to fight, if you will, some of those battles, to make sure that the things that were necessary to make it a great space were included. And I think that you can see the beauty of what Rosemary Square did was they recognized that they kind of stood separate, and there was an intention for that in the 90s because that area was so riddled with crack cocaine and crack houses. So they were trying to separate themselves. But then as we evolve into the 2000s and things are changing, it was time for them to recreate themselves and to match the city. And that was our intention, to go all the way north into a neighborhood that had been historically defunded, not really maintained or paid attention to. And, you know, it had to be something that someone who was a guardian, if you will, of those areas, and to build relationships, because Serena will tell you, she did a couple of events there. There are great folks in these communities doing great work, but they don't have some of the support that they need. And so I could come back to the mayor and say, listen, this is what we need. And she could facilitate some of those things to build capacity, to build trust with the government, to build you know, a sense of community, that this was their community as well, and that somebody was listening to what their needs were. You can see the other priority, the other things that I had on my plate on this sheet.
I think the other important thing was to have somebody to also advocate internally. So when engineering was working on a project or planning was working on a project, we could have somebody there saying, look, you know, is this going to be a complete street? Are we addressing shade trees? Or are we, how are pedestrians going to get across here? Somebody who could advocate for these ideas internally as well. So some of the challenges, can't tell you how many times I heard, this is not Copenhagen. We're not going to ride bikes. It's too hot. There's no shade. Nobody rides bikes. You know, I'm not going to walk in the Northwest. It's not safe. The whole idea of a road diet. Oh my goodness. You know, people want bigger and better roads, bigger, not better roads. The Florida Department of Transportation never met a road it didn't love and want to widen. And the same with our county government. You know, I talked to you about closing a part of Flagler Drive. That was one of the things that didn't work for us, but I hope someday it will. And I think part of the importance that I would share with you who are on this is supporting your leaders is so critical. Informing the leaders that you work for, the mayors, the city commissioners, helping them to know if that architect hadn't handed me Jeff Speck's book, I'm not sure if I would have where I would be on this journey if somebody hadn't given me that information. And the other part of the story is I'm no longer mayor, and there's a new mayor who has very different priorities. In order for this to work, this work to continue, we need people in the planning department, in that engineering department, who are going to continue to advocate for this vision and to continue to inform the new mayor of the importance of making a city for people, designing a city for people. So that's what I challenge you with, you who are here on this webinar. When you're working with the city, make sure that you're connecting with the mayor and having that person understand the importance of a clear vision for the people who work with him and for him or her, and supporting that person. So I have this video. Wendy, when was this video done? A couple of years ago?
Yeah, sorry. It was for your last State of the City address.
So it was 2019, actually, then.
Turn it up, turn it up.
It's time to set the stage for our future. Rather than building a city around cars, we're trying to build the city around people. In order to have a vibrant city, we needed to have vibrant public spaces that people wanted to be in. My job is to make sure that we are putting public life into all of our projects. Public life is everything from walking, biking, engaging in the public spaces, playing.
So when we talk about transportation for everybody, we're thinking of creating a unified system that is, one, is free, or some kind of program that helps all of our citizens. We have bike share right now, and the scooters are coming in, so we have different micro-mobility options. The other thing that we're doing is expanding our trolley network by taking it north and south of the city and all the way out west, which hasn't been done before. We've been really lucky to partner with FPL to bring some solar trees to our city. And it's one of the many things that we're doing to look at renewable energy. When you live in a sustainable and resilient city, businesses are going to do better. Our large tree canopy program, we're looking at specific areas where we want to enhance walking and biking. So around downtown or northwest.
I coordinate the Mayor's Village Initiative program, which is focused on reducing violence and improving outcomes. In time, we can continue to build trust and, build relationships between these two areas of the city.
All the departments are working together in a way that I've never seen before to create outcomes that are going to make the city just like the place to be.
Turn it up.
Sorry about that. Okay, I guess that's the end. Anyway, so that was 2 years ago, before COVID, and a lot of things have changed and happened, but I see things picking up again. But one of the things that has happened in the last, over the last 10 years, so we've seen a big influx of more businesses into our city. A lot more financial services. Goldman Sachs is moving in. The dreams I had in 2011 of bringing jobs to our city, we're seeing, and it's a result of making our city a place that's livable, walkable, a place where people want to be. So I'll leave it at that and turn it back to John.
Mayor, thank you, and Wendy, thank you so much. We have a few questions in here. So let me start out, and if others have questions, feel free to raise your hand with the little icon in Zoom under reactions. You click on reactions and you could kind of raise your hand. It kind of looks like that. But I'll read the questions in the meantime in the chat. And then if you raise your hand, I would prefer you ask your own question. So I'll call upon you. So the first question that I see is, kind of based on the lessons of the Flagler pilot drive, what would you have done maybe differently to overcome the resistance of the NIMBYs on that project?
Yeah, I had been sort of enamored with these pop-up ideas. So this is going to be a pop-up idea, a pilot. What I should have done was spend a lot more time talking to people about what we wanted to do and preparing them for what we wanted to do and selling it. And, you know, it was my mistake. You know, we should have been better at selling it up front first and helping people to understand what the benefits would be to them. And it just was unfortunate that a couple of people who were moving from Palm Beach to West Palm Beach, most of our, I have to say, a good deal of our opposition came from the town of Palm Beach on this. So, you know, we should have been better reaching out to those people. Wendy, I see you're nodding your head. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the big takeaway. And I think, unfortunately, it ended up being that there was a hurricane or something for the leading up to it, where we weren't able to really do some of the outreach that we had intended.
Right.
So, and then it just kind of happened. So yeah, I think that's the big takeaway. More community engagement.
Yes.
Richard Dunn, would you, I see a check mark next to you. I'm assuming you want to ask a question? Can you unmute yourself?
Thank you. First of all, Jeri, appreciate everything you did as mayor. I'm Palm Beach Gardens residents, but I saw it from far. Thank you. But my question has to do a little bit more digging in. Could you explain or review just briefly a few more of the changes you did in the development review department, or how you were able to reduce the time or maybe reduce the opposition? If you could clarify maybe some aspects of that. Thank you.
I think the most important thing is I put a new leader in that department. And I consolidated, I didn't consolidate, I put under one head building services and permitting, what's the word I want? Code enforcement, and planning, the planning department. So I think bringing the building services into the planning, working with the same leader as the planning department really helped to get that going. Putting in a dynamic leader into that department who understood our goals. You know, when I was running for mayor, people would stop me on the street and say, it took me 6 months to get a permit for it to put a screen room on the back of my house. No, you know, we want people to be able to do those things. But then I would also have developers come to me and say, we're never building in West Palm Beach. You know, it's just too hard. It's too complicated. It takes too long. There's too many hurdles to jump. So I changed out the leadership and brought someone in and said, you need to get rid of these hurdles. And I want to cut the time down. We started keeping track of time, monitoring all of that. So. Yeah.
We have two questions that I think we could probably address at the same time. One is there a follow-up study on how the changes have affected the area businesses? And then is there a position description for the director of public life?
Yes, we do have a position description, and John, we can send it to you. I know, Wendy, you have it, right? We can send it to you and then you could share it with whomever. What was the first part of it?
The first part of the question was what follow-up studies may have been done to look at the impacts on businesses? Well,
I can tell you that our business tax receipts went up 65%. So that meant more. That's just during the time I was mayor. It's gone up since then. So there are more businesses in our city choosing to be in our city and buying into the whole walkability piece. We also learned, and this is not a study, but people were bringing their businesses into the city because the people who worked for them, the millennials and others, wanted to be able to get out and walk to lunch, wanted to be able to get out and go to Starbucks. And so there were incentivized to that. But we looked at, we had an economic development study done in 2018. And that compared us to cities like Austin and some other cities, I can't remember off the top of my head. but we were growing jobs faster than those cities. We were bringing jobs into our city faster than those cities. And if you recall, one of my goals when I took office in 2011 was jobs. You know, we needed to raise our property values. We needed to get jobs here. And the way we did this was by making our city a place where people wanted to be. And that was something I talked about all of the time when I met with our working people, when I met with our department heads, when we had any kind of event. I talked about how important their jobs were. You know, the people who picked up the garbage, the people who cleaned the streets, the people who mowed the lawns at the park, how important their jobs were to making our city a place where people wanted to be.
Are there others that would like to ask a question? Feel free to, unmute yourself or raise your hand or put it in the chat window.
Yeah, we certainly had all of the pushback that everybody else has on bike lanes. One of my favorite was we wanted to put bike lanes on one of the roads in the southern part of our city. And there was a big protest against it. And they were protesting because it would take parking spaces away. Well, the fact of the matter is there was no parking on those streets by ordinance, and they were not supposed to be parking on the streets to begin with. But, you know, there are just so many people who were just nervous about the whole bike lane piece, taking away room for a car to be.
Mayor, I have an important question. So the city of West Palm Beach has, very distinct neighborhoods that, some of them have very high proportions of ethnic communities and Black populations and impoverished populations. How did you try to address equitable investment in these topics while you were the mayor?
Well, that's a very important question, and that's one of the reasons we chose Dancing to the Sunset as our first and most important project that we wanted to take on, because we wanted to get people moving into the Northwest neighborhood, walking there, using the facilities. We also have one of the other projects was to connect 15th Street, which is where a lot of kids walk to school, and make that more walkable for the kids walking to school. We also started a Vision Zero program because on some of our streets, one of which is Broadway, there are no crosswalks. You know, people couldn't get across the street, so they were just walking across the street and getting hit by cars. And that's where, many of our our folks with struggling live along Broadway. There's a big Hispanic community. There's a lot of workers who get picked up for day jobs along Broadway, and it just wasn't safe. So now we finally got FDOT to let us move forward with redoing Broadway. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it was certainly a big part of it. And there's my husband.
John, can I just follow up and say that, like, if you go to Windsor Avenue in the North End, all these projects that were coming online, Broadway, there was one on Pinewood, any project. I helped with Lake Avenue in your neighborhood. I helped with south of that, down by Garden Avenue, down south. So I was strategically involved with every single project that was coming online in the city to ensure that there was equity. And you're going to see Tamron Avenue coming online in a way that's going to look like Clematis. That was a lot of politicking and making sure I stayed firm in the finishes because they're expensive and there isn't a lot of business there right now, but there will be. So the mayor empowered me and helped support me to make sure that was happening across the city equitably, no matter whether it was a rich community. We did something on South Flagler because it was a drainage problem and trying to start building resiliency. And we know Penny Redford and her team did a whole resiliency study that was being built into all of this work that we were doing, because we know that the communities of color are going to be disproportionately affected by climate change, more so than the other neighborhoods. So we were actually strategizing on ways in those communities to do the cooling centers and the things, you know, to protect them from flooding and all of those kinds of projects, to make sure that it was happening citywide equitably. That was part of the function. She had, you know, me as her arm, making sure that that was happening everywhere.
And you know, to go back to my original statement when I first became mayor, wondering what the heck I was going to do and what my job was, what I quickly learned was that my job was to make sure people like Wendy and all of the 1,600 employees in the city had what they needed to do their job. They needed a clear vision, they needed financial stability, they needed empowerment, they needed to be involved in decision making. All of that was what I quickly understood was what I needed to be doing.
Thank you both, Jeri and Wendy. There's also a question in the chat for Professor Merlin. You gave an example case study of walk to a park. Have you explored and promoted a 10-minute walk to the park idea? And have you explored partnering with county parks and recreation?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to partner with a local parks agency. I think there's different kinds of parks that people get to different ways, different scales of parks. You know, we have our larger natural parks that people tend to drive to, and then we have neighborhood parks or pocket parks that people tend to walk to. I would love to do a study of that locally, but you know, one of my main findings is that I think people will go a good deal more than 10 minutes to get to a neighborhood park.
Well, I think we've come to the end of the webinar. Are there any final burning questions? Well, you know, this is just incredible. You know, we've ended the hour and a half with 58 participants. We have had very few people drop off, which just speaks to the level of interest of the speakers. So I want to thank you all again, Louis, Lisa, Jeri, Wendy, and I want to especially thank Serena, who, you know, was really the driving force behind the scenes on all of this. And please, you know, keep us, you know, look at your emails. We'll be sending out future newsletters about upcoming webinars. And so thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.